Hi, welcome to my technical. I've got 3 pieces for today, and the first of which is called Blues for Alice. Cool, thank you. Next piece is Naima, composed by John Coltrane. Yeah, hope you enjoy. And last up for today is Bernie's Tune. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm now going to talk a bit about each of the pieces you just heard, and I'll start with Blues for Alice. So the most challenging part of this piece for me really was the improvisation and the harmony aspect of it. The chords move around quite a lot, and they use the Parker changes format, and this was quite a challenge when thinking about the solo, and I had to sort of change the way that I think about and approach chords. So looking more at arpeggios and just picking out key notes from each chord rather than thinking about, okay, now we're getting to a dominant chord, mixed Lydian scale, more thinking about, okay, let's arpeggiate this, or if it's an altered dominant chord, maybe fitting a couple of the altered tones in there. But yeah, trying to break out of the scale mindset and look more at arpeggios and just picking out some key notes from that. The tempo and the melody were a bit of a challenge initially, because a lot of me and Denny have discussed that a lot of Charlie Parker tunes don't really fit nicely on the guitar because they were written for a saxophone, and everything fits well on under your fingers on a saxophone because all the notes are there. Whereas on a guitar, there's a lot of crossing strings on the same fret, which is something I also noticed in Billy's Bounce, a piece that I played in my recital last year. So that was a bit of a challenge to try and fit that on the guitar in a nice way and get it to flow. So the tempo of that, I had to slow that right down while I was learning it, gradually build that up, and once I got it to flow and learnt it and everything, that was a nice piece. It was comfortable to get through. The rhythm was fine. In the melody, I've been working a lot on my bebop phrasing recently in my practice, so all the triplets and that sort of thing were fine for the most part, so yeah, that was fine. Dynamics, something that's fine as well. The piece pretty much, the melody holds the same sort of dynamic the whole way through. There's one sort of peak, which if you listen to Parker's recording, he does like 3 quick swoops up to a note. And I tried to incorporate that in my melody as well by like sliding, which is you can't really show dynamic contrast as well on the guitar as you can on a saxophone, but that was the best sort of I could do for that. But memorising was something that was quite tricky for me initially as well, in all aspects of the piece. So right through from the melody to the changes and to thinking about improvising, memorising the tune was just it's just really difficult for me. So the melody doesn't really follow a pattern. It's sort of there's small sections that aren't repeated, and just trying to remember, okay, this bit comes next, and in terms of the chord changes as well, trying to wrap my head around how it was moving was a challenge initially, but once I sort of trusted my ear a bit more, and just learned, after listening to it a lot more and playing along to the track, that was mostly fine. But yeah, so on to the next piece with Naima. This had a whole different set of challenges to Blues for Alice, being a completely contrasting piece in terms of being a ballad. Dynamics were hard to showcase, as I said previously, on a guitar. But this was a piece that I really had to consider that in. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the shape of the melody and how I'm going to show light and shade. And there's like one peak as well in this melody, similar to Blues for Alice, which again on a saxophone it is much easier to have dynamic contrast. So to show that on a guitar was quite hard. So I had to really be quite varying in my attack with my right hand as to how hard I'm plucking the strings. So yeah, just trying to give the melody a bit of interest really, because single note lines on a ballad on a guitar can sound a bit boring if nothing else is going on. So that's often why chord melodies will be used, and that's why I decided to use octaves in this case, just to fill it out a bit more. So that helped in that aspect, because initially I played through the melody and just as a single note line, and nothing it didn't really sound like much was going on, but yeah, so that helped sort of fill out the melody a bit more and give it a bit more of a full sound. Again, a piece composed for a saxophone was a bit tricky to fit onto a guitar. A lot easier than with Blues for Alice, as it is a ballad, so slower tempo and all that, and the melody sort of holds notes for a lot longer. But that was a bit tricky because there's again crossing strings on the same fret. With an octave, position as well is quite tricky. So practicing that and getting used to that, and with a ballad you really don't want to disrupt the atmosphere or the serenity, whatever you want to call it, of the ballad and of the piece. So that was something that I really wanted to get smooth, so that it didn't sound like a clunky transition or anything like that. In terms of memorising it, it was a lot easier than the other two tunes. Being a ballad, it's a lot slower. Harmonic rhythm is a lot slower. Only 1 or 2 chords per bar in the whole piece, so that made it a lot easier to get my head around the harmony, even though it is a bit angular at times, which was a bit of a challenge when improvising, to try and create some nice lines through that. But I found once I started to think a bit more freely, managed to create some nice lines, so that was good. The slower tempo helped with that too, as it gives me a lot more time to think about what I'm going to play on each chord, as opposed to only having a couple of beats with which to highlight a particular change. In this case, 1 chord for a whole bar. For example, it stays on B flat for a bar and then goes to E flat minor 7. So that's quite a nice change, and you've got a whole bar there to just sort of expand on the Dorian scale, which was nice. And although this was a lot easier than something like Blues for Alice, it did have a separate challenge of, okay, I've got all this time with which to solo in, how can I fill up that time without starting to repeat myself? So I had to think of more ideas and not play too slowly, because with a ballad being slower, it was quite easy just to play lots of slow lines and lots of just crotchets and quavers and stuff, but trying to think about some faster flurries, some triplets, some semi-quavers as well, just to give it a bit of contrast in the improvising, and also sort of blend the solo out of the head and back in again, so not ending the head and then immediately going in off into a solo, but trying to make it a consistent atmosphere and not jarring to the listener in any way when it transitions into the solo. And finally, with Bernie's tune, the biggest challenge by far was the tempo. I ended up putting it at 195 and probably should have dropped it down a little bit, but the reason I did that was I'd been playing it quite a bit slower, and the melody just didn't sound right at all at a slower tempo. I think the only way I could have done it at a slower tempo is by going along the lines of the Joe Pass recording of this song, where he plays it a lot slower and doesn't have the fast arpeggios in the melody. Like, it's definitely a completely different feel to something like the Ella Fitzgerald version, which is really up-tempo. But I personally think that suits the melody a lot more, so I really wanted to try and push that aspect of my playing. So I had to work my way up there, and again, melody didn't really fit very well on the guitar, so I spent a lot of time running like the fast sections, and just getting them to swing nicely, getting my fingers around it, again crossing strings on the same fret is really hard at a fast tempo, so that was something I spent a lot of time on. Improvising was okay on this piece actually, because I spoke to Denny about it a lot, and we managed to simplify the chord progression with the A section just basically in D minor and B flat 7, and then moving into the B section, you can play B flat over the whole thing, but as there's only 2 beats on each of the 2-5-6, 2-5-1 bits, we decided to break it down into 1 and 5, so looking at altered tones when it gets to the 5 chord. Yeah, and due to the simple harmony, it was quite easy to memorise this piece, the changes and the melody and everything. So overall, each piece has challenged different aspects of my playing and pushed me to think in different ways, and I think this has been really beneficial to me. And I feel I've really developed over the course of learning these pieces. So yeah, thank you very much.